rips it, scores in overtime. Checked by Bedard. He's got a breakaway. Scores! What a goal by Connor Bedard!
Absolute cinema. Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes, back for another video. We are nearing the end of August. Thank God the worst month of the season is almost over. We are approaching September, meaning NHL National Hockey League training camp is on the horizon for the Chicago Blackhawks. Regular season starts September 29th. Preseason starts September 19th. So that means training camp is around the corner. Probably will start, a bit before, the start of preseason on September 19th. We don't have the official schedule yet. We don't have the official times and everything, but we know training camp normally starts like the week before preseason. That's normally when those prospect showcase games and all that stuff takes place. So we're close. We're only about 3 weeks away. NHL hockey season, Blackhawks season is very close. The off season, the dog days of the summer are nearly over. So we're getting very close to the season here. So I thought I'd do a video today taking another look at the Blackhawks roster as we get closer to the season. I want to take a look at kind of the way this lineup could shake out as we get in the training camp here. Because the Blackhawks have something this year. They're going to have a dilemma this year they haven't really had in a while. And that's true roster battles, true roster competition. We haven't really had that in a long time. Of course, the Blackhawks have been a rebuilding team the past, 4 years or so. So typically with rebuilding teams, there isn't as much competition for spots in the roster because the rosters tend to be more depleted. So, this Blackhawks team has a lot more options to work with. There's a lot more talent, on display here. There's a lot more talent available, a lot more skill in this team. So, there's a lot more options to go around, especially all the moves that have been made this offseason by general manager Kyle Davidson. Coach Jeff Blashill is going to have, a lot to weigh, as he sort of builds this roster ahead of this upcoming season. So I think Blackhawks training camp is going to be very interesting. I look at the forward core, the defense core, even the goaltending. I think every position is going to have some sort of, competition to it. So that's going to be very interesting to see. So I'm going to take a look at the Blackhawks lineup today, projected lineup via Puckpedia, and give sort of my take on where I could see this how I kind of see this playing out as the season approaches here, both with and without Bedard, because of course the roster that we'll see to start the season will look a bit different once Bedard's come back from injury about a month later. So that's why I wanted to take a look at it today. So anyway, here is the Puckpedia projected lineup today, of course, without Connor Bedard as he's on the IR. Future captain there, most likely Connor Bedard, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, here we go. Here's the lineup. As you can see here, via Puckpedia, we got Tyler Bertuzzi, Frank Nazar, Patrick Kane, first line. Of course, there's going to be a battle here. I think that's going to be battle number one, is this first line center spot. That's going to be between Nazar, Frundell. While Bedard's out, it's going to be one of those two, right? It's going to be a first line center. We know Patrick Kane's going to be in the first line. Pretty good chance of that, I would think. He could be in the second line, but while Bedard's out, you got then Kaner's going to be, on line one, showtime. And then I think Bertuzzi probably makes sense at those two. I think Nazar, Kane to playing those together, I think would make sense. You think Kane's going to get reps at Bedard, when he comes back. So while Nazar's filling in Bedard's 1C slot, I think, it makes sense to play him with Patrick Kane. I think, Kane's definitely a guy can have a nice impact on Nazar's game. In terms of the second line, we got Nick Lardis, Anton Frundell, Roman Kantsarov. So the rookies of Frundell, Kantsarov on line two with Nick Lardis. Lardis spent a lot of time in the top six towards the end of last year, so I think he makes sense with those guys. Very young, youthful second line here. Third line, we got Teuvo Teravainen, Oliver Moore, Ryan Green. So I like Moore and Green together in the third line here. Moore at center, Green in the wing. Turbo time, got the veteran kind of with them there. And then we got prototypical fourth line here. Not a very exciting fourth line, but it is what you typically see out of a fourth line. Jordan Greenway, Ryan Donato, Cole Smith here. And then we got three extras that'll kind of be fighting for scraps there. Andrew Mangiapane, Sasha Boisvert, and Landon Slaggert. So let's talk about the forward core first. Most especially the roster battles here. So there's going to be a few spots up for grabs here, as you can see. Sasha Boisvert is definitely going to be one to watch, right? Boisvert, of course, played 7 games with the Blackhawks end of last season, looked decent, got his first goal, got his first assist, got his first couple points. So Boisvert, he was able to kind of check off a few marks there in his initial Blackhawks stint, coming over from the college ranks. But definitely looked like a player, though, that could use some seasoning in Rockford. I would think for Sasha Boisvert's development, it would be better spent in Rockford this year, at least to start. Maybe, if he has a good run in Rockford like Nick Lardis, like Oliver Moore had last year, maybe we see Boisvert brought up at some point during the season, maybe towards the end of the year. If there's an opening there, potentially in the roster, if there's injuries, he could be your first call-up, for instance. But I do think, with Bedard being out to start the year, there could be a chance there for Boisvert to start the year at the Blackhawks. Right now, he's number 15 here. For me in the depth chart, he's number 15. Typically, there's 14 spots up for grabs. Typically it's 14 forwards, 7 defensemen, 2 goaltenders. Of course, you can switch that around, but typically that's what you see in terms of NHL lineups rosters and opening nights. So Brovera right now, he's on the outside looking in right now. For me, I think, he would be the first guy, I think, or the last guy cut who sent down the Rockford, as training camps get underway. If he has a very good camp, though, there's a good chance, maybe he's impressive enough to where he could at least start the year at the Blackhawks. And then Bedard's brought back from injury. You think he's probably sent down, depending on how he's doing, right? Because he probably won't be playing every game, probably be on the bench. Like last year, for instance, when Bivera was with the Hawks end of the year, he spent as much games pretty much in the press box and on the bench than he did in the actual lineup. And I just don't think for Bivera at this stage that would be good for his development. 2024 draft pick, 20-year-old player here. I think he'd be much better spent playing first line minutes with the Rockford Ice Hogs as opposed to fourth line / 13th forward, bench minutes at the Blackhawks. So Bivera, I think for me is the first guy that I'm going to put down here. I think for me, he's just outside looking in. For me, I think it'd be better spent with Rockford this year, but we'll see. I know Boisvert worked hard he's been working hard this offseason. Based off of some of the pictures I've seen circling, like he looks pretty ripped. He looks like he's definitely in very good shape as the season approaches. So we'll see. Maybe he comes into the camp guns blazing and looks NHL ready, and maybe he joins Kantsarov and Frondell as rookies on his Blackhawks team. But for me, he'd have to have a pretty good camp. He'd have to bump out, one of these guys, which he could. We'll talk about those next guys, right? I think Mangiapane and Slaggert are kind of the next bubble guys. For me, they're going to be your 13th to 14th forwards. To start the year. For me, these are the guys that will be on the team, but probably won't be in the lineup every game. They'll play when there's injuries. They'll play if one of these guys is struggling, needs to come out of the lineup. They'll draw in, especially if there's like a back-to-back and they want to take out Greenway, Smith. They can, or Donato, Mangiapane, Slaggert could draw in. But I don't think either of these guys have to be, everyday lineup players, especially Mangiapane. Mangiapane is definitely a guy to where I don't really understand, what his role is going to be at this team. It definitely feels like he's going to be the Sam Lafferty of this team. It feels like he's an insurance option. He's an extra forward. He's an extra forward. There's going to be injuries, you would think. So, when that occurs, when players draw the lineup, Mangiapane can draw in. So, yeah, it definitely feels like he's sort of the insurance option of this team. I don't think he's going to be a guy that necessarily plays a ton, especially after, the additions of Jordan Greenway and Cole Smith. I think before those additions, you could kind of see a spot for him in the bottom 6, but you would think that Greenway, Smith, since they're, the newest additions, when we signed Cole Smith to that, $3 million by 3 contract. So I would think he's going to get priority there. He's a guy that played, he's pretty much an everyday fourth line player, right? He's, very valuable in the PK, penalty kill. He has his uses beyond the score sheet. Mangiapane, if he's not producing, is probably not much he's going to provide outside the score sheet. So I would think guys like Smith, Greenway, Jordan Greenway is another guy who's, prototypical fourth line player, physical forward with size, could put him in your penalty kill, right? So Greenway's not going to produce a ton, but I would think between Greenway, Smith, they're going to get prioritized over Mangiapane. Donato at this point, he's a good enough bottom 6 player to where I think he should be an everyday guy. So yeah, I think that leaves Mangiapane to 13th forward, and then that also leaves Landon Slaggert down here. Yeah, I mean, Slaggert's another guy who kind of has to have a pretty, he has to have a training camp. He's definitely a guy, I think there's a lot of, I'd say pressure on him. I would say he's kind of the Cole and Doc of this team to where, I definitely see, the end of the road here potentially approaching for Slaggert. I mean, unless he's able to bump one of these guys out, he could be a PK asset for Slaggert, but he's not a guy that produces enough to where he needs to provide more beyond the score sheet. With Slaggert, we know he's a good skater. He's a good worker. Again, decent penalty killer, but you already have, Greenway could do that. You already have Smith. You already have Green. You have a good chunk of PK guys, Teravainen and more on his team, Nazar. So I just don't really see Slaggert's role here per se. I definitely think he's a guy like Mangiapane who's outside looking in. Could even be a guy, if Boisvert is a really good camp, maybe Boisvert actually bumps Slaggert down and Slaggert's in Rockford. I would think Boisvert would probably start because if they were to send Slaggert down, I believe he'd have to clear waivers, which I think at this point he probably would. I'd be surprised if someone claimed him, but there is something taken into account there. But yeah, Slaggert, again, another guy who's bounced around between Chicago, Rockford. At this point, 2020 draft pick, you like him to be an everyday guy, but I just don't think he's done enough for me to fully assert himself in that role. So Slaggert for me is a guy I don't mind seeing in Rockford, but, does it happen with Jet Blast show? We'll see. But I do think Slaggert, Boisvert, there definitely could be a battle there, but for that sort of 14th forward spot there. But for now, I have Slaggert there because he has, 4 years of experience. You would think that he'd probably get the preference there. But yeah, this is your forward core, most likely while Bedard's out. Of course, that's while Bedard's out. When Bedard comes back, there's going to be another dilemma that arises here. So let's go to the IR here. Let's place Bedard back into the lineup here, right? So Bedard comes back approximately late October, early November. Bedard comes back. What happens here? So, well, obviously Bedard draws into 1C. Where does Frank Nazar go? Do the Hawks decide we want to keep Frank Nazar at center? If so, Nazar likely draws right here in Alvar Moore's slot. Alvar Moore draws on the wing, and that bumps Teravainen down the fourth line. He would bump out one of Greenway Smith. We'll say Jordan Greenway. Since Smith was a free agent signing and Greenway was a trade acquisition, secondary trade acquisition, the Byram trade, I would think Smith will probably get preference over Greenway. So Greenway's down here. 15 forwards here. That means somebody's got to be, the odd man out. Either Slaggert's, probably means Slaggert's moved down the Rockford, you would think. So we'll do that. Could also mean there's a trade as well. A little bit of a misinput there. It could mean there's a trade as well. Potentially, maybe Mangiapane is a guy that's moved. When Bedard comes back, there could be, there's an extra man there, right? Because when Bedard comes back, suddenly you have 15 forwards again. Someone has to draw down. Again, most likely Slaggert, but if they want to keep Slaggert up, potentially Mangiapane could be a guy they move. But that is assuming as well that all these guys are healthy. Look, when Bedard comes back, a month into the season, I think it's pretty unlikely that everybody's going to be healthy. I mean, Nazar had injury last year, Moore had injury last year. Patrick Kane hasn't played a full 82-game season in like 5 years. So, there's going to be injuries here, we don't want to think that way. Hopefully everyone's healthy, but there's probably going to be injuries. So, but yeah, so I would think probably, Slaggert's drawn down and then, Greenway, Mangiapane are probably your extras. Or are they, right? If Nazar's at center then, but if Nazar, has a great start to the year, in that top six, playing a Patrick Kane, I would think he'd be better served in the top six, potentially on the wing, assuming Frundell is a 2C behind Bedard, and they want to move Nazar, to the wing, and so they could play in the top six. That means Nazar is probably put into this spot right here, in the Nick Lardis spot. That draws Nick Lardis down to the third line, which I think could work for him, but you will notice something here. By doing so, that bumps Teuvo Teravainen down to the fourth line. Now, for me, in my personal opinion, I don't mind Teravainen being a fourth-line player at this stage. I don't mind it. Teravainen didn't have a great year last year. He has 1 year left on his contract. He has one more chance to get the bag. I don't think it's going to happen here. I don't really see a long-term role for Teravainen with this team. I think he's probably going to be moved anyway. So, for me, I don't mind Teravainen, playing lower in the lineup, but does Jeff Blashill think that way? I don't know. Jeff Blashill strikes me as a guy who's probably give the vets, that treatment. So if Teravainen's, kept in that third line there, does that mean that Nick Lardis is then placed down here in the fourth line? And I don't know about you. I don't think Nick Lardis makes any sense on the fourth line. So what does that mean? I don't think this should happen. Let me make this very clear. I don't think this should happen. I think Nick Lardis did more than enough last year. 10 goals, 5 assists, 15 points in 41 games. Over a point per game player in Rockford. And you would think to start this year, if he's playing in the top six while Bedard's out and he's cooking, maybe Nick Lardis stays in the top six, right? And then Nazar's your 3C. And then, we can figure out how, this bottom six develops, right? But, so yeah, if they stick at the original plan of Bedard, Frundell, Nazar being the 1, 2, 3 centers, this might not be a problem for Lardis. He stays in the top six. But if Frank Nazar is moved back to the wing, when Bedard comes back, he stays in the top six. That drops Lardis down. You would think it'd be Lardis, right? We know Backdoor Bert's going to be a top six guy. Obviously, Bedsy. We know Kane's going to be. Kancherov should be. I mean, it's not a guarantee that Kancherov is, right? I mean, we think Kancherov is going to have, a great rookie year like Frundell, but he could struggle. But assuming Kancherov makes that transition nicely, he should be, top six guy, just like Frundell. I think Nazar's a top six talent that, we'll see if they actually play in there. But, in terms of the player, he should be in the top six. So, yeah, that would mean, Nick Lardis would be the guy that's probably bumped down there. Somebody's got to be bumped down. But, yeah, does Jeff Blashill want to play Lardis, in the bottom six? Is Nick Lardis a bottom six player? For me, probably second line sniper. That's Nick Lardis' game. Not really, typical bottom six defensive player, Nick Lardis. So he's a power play guy, right? So he's a sniper. He's a shooter. I mean, I think him in the third line could work if he's playing with Moore. If he's playing with Green, I think, a Lardis, Screen, Moore third line could work. But then Teravainen, Donato down here in the fourth line. I think Donato makes sense in the bottom six, fourth line, but does Teravainen? I'm not really sure. Teravainen's not really known to be a physical, fourth line energy player. So yeah, there is a bit of a dilemma there. Because, yeah, I mean, Greenway, Denial, Smith, those are fourth-line players, but you're not going to scratch Teravainen then. You're not going to scratch Teravainen. So what happens here? It feels like there's a logjam. I don't want to send Nick Lardis or, Moore down to Rockford. I think both those guys are NHL players at this point. I don't want to send any of these guys down to Rockford. So what happens here? It probably means, if everyone's healthy, there could be a move there. I mean, if Teravainen's got 1 year left in his deal and he's going to be, he's going to walk anyway, probably in free agency, or maybe the Hawks move him the trade deadline. Maybe they just get ahead of the curve and maybe they just move him, when Bedard comes back, and that opens up a spot for Lardis to stay, in this top 9 here and not to go down to Rockford. Yeah, there's going to be some question marks there, right? Teravainen's definitely a guy that's definitely, he's definitely, he's a questionable one for me. I mean, maybe he has a bounce back year, maybe he gets back to the form he showed, a couple years ago. He gets back to that form, but yeah, I just don't see him playing, top 6 minutes on his team. So if he's not playing top 6 minutes on his team and he's playing third line minutes, I don't see Teravainen having some miraculous bounce back this year. I mean, it is a contract year, so maybe he has a bit more incentive, imperative to kind of, to have a bounce back season, in a contract year. He's going to want to get the bag. It could be his last chance. Teravainen, of course, 31-year-old player. It could be his last chance to get a nice contract. So maybe that, raises the incentive for him to have a big year and he stays up there. But yeah, there's going to be some question marks there. Of course, again, like I said earlier, injuries are probably going to be a thing. And if injuries are a thing, it's not going to be a problem. So, but if it is a problem, it's a good problem to have. And frankly, it's a problem this Blackhawks team hasn't had in a long time. Like, when was the last year the Blackhawks had a logjam of forwards, a logjam of options to work with heading into the season, a logjam of NHL caliber players? I mean, in past seasons, the Blackhawks have had a hard enough time finding 12 NHL caliber players. So it's a good problem to have. It means this team is heading in the right direction. It means this team is clearly putting in that effort. They want to be in that playoff race this year. Alex Vlasic said himself very recently, like, this team is definitely has playoffs on the mind. I know a lot of people have been sort of scoffing at that, but I think you look at, the level of players on display here. If these players do pop off, you have the talent here. You have the talent. It's all going to come down to how Jeff Blashill and the coaching staff utilizes this talent. What kind of line combinations, what kind of chemistry does Jeff Blashill try to build? How is the power play? How does that look? Like, that's going to be what determines this. How does the PK look? Jeff Blashill, I think we're going to learn a lot about him this year in terms of if he's the guy, because I do think he has a talent to work with this year. But anyway, that's the forward core. Now let's get to the defensive goaltending, because there are some question marks here as well. You will notice down here, well, first we'll get to the pairs, right? We got Vlasic, Byram, assuming, Vlasic top left D, Byram left shot, but, we only have 2 natural right shots, so it means Byram's probably got to play top pair right side, which he's done in the past. Byram's been a guy who could play, on both sides, so Byram's top pair right shot for now. Then that leads Kaiser, Levshunov. We've seen that pair a lot, right? And then Ian Cole, Sam Renzel is your third pair. And then that leaves the 7th, 8th defenseman of Kevin Korchinski and Ethan Del Mastro, who you notice that gave fake contracts here. Both these two still are not signed. I mean, we're literally like 3 weeks away from training camp. So yeah, Korchinski and Del Mastro, I would assume those two should get signed soon. I would think that would be probably 1-2 year bridge deals. But yeah, for now, that's going to be the battle. It's going to be between these two, right, for kind of that 7th D-man slot. Assuming it's going to be 7 spots up for grabs here, it means the battle for that 7th defenseman spot is going to be between Kevin Korchinski and Ethan Del Mastro, because we know, Byram, Vlasic, Kaiser, Cole, the locks. Artie and Renzel, you would think, they're going to want to play those two, right? Artie and Renzel, they're going to want to play. I doubt either of those two. I mean, Artie, they had so many chances last year, potentially send him down the Rockford. They never did. So yeah, Artie, they're going to play at this point. They're going to hope he takes those steps this year. Sam Renzel did spend some time at Rockford last year, so he could be a guy that maybe, Korch, can maybe he could bump him out there. But I would think at this point, Renzel is definitely ahead of him in the depth chart. So yeah, I think that's most likely your top 6, and that leaves these two fighting for that 7th spot. So, and that's gonna be something to watch, because I think at this point, Korchinski is definitely a guy that's the hardest to figure out here. Because for Korchinski, like, you don't really want to be the 7th defenseman, because it means he's not going to be playing a lot. He's not going to be playing a lot of minutes. He's not going to be playing every game. I don't think that'd be great for his development at this point. But do you want to see Korchinski spending a 3rd year in Rockford, though? A 3rd year in Rockford? He's a 2022 draft pick. I don't think you want to see that either. So I don't really know what's best for Korchinski. It definitely feels like the wild card here. I mean, maybe he comes in, has a ridiculous camp, and he's finally able to earn a full-time spot. Maybe he bumps out one of these guys. Maybe Artie's struggling. Maybe Renzel's struggling. Maybe he bumps one of those two out. I don't know. But Korchinski's definitely the guy that had the hardest time figuring out. And yeah, if the Hawks do think that, it's better for Korchinski playing first pair of minutes in Rockford, and he's down in Rockford, and then Del Mastro is then your 7th D, which might make more sense. I mean, I personally think Korchinski's got a lot more, to gain here. I think Korchinski's got, a much higher ceiling. I think he has, a higher level to reach compared to Del Mastro, but I would say Del Mastro is more of your prototypical sound defenseman. Del Mastro is a, third, sixth, seventh, third pair sound defenseman, defensive guy. He's a shutdown guy. Whereas Korchinski is an offensive player, right? He's got that offensive ceiling as a defenseman, right? So for Korchinski, Del Mastro probably makes more sense as your seventh D from that standpoint. So it also depends, right, again, how Blashill utilizes the defense. I mean, last year, Blashill did, utilize the 11 forward, 7 defenseman track a lot. So if he does that again, if he brings back that kind of 11 forward, 7 D-man rotation, that could give these guys, more time than we expect. But I don't anticipate that happening this year because I think Blashill did that last year because he had so few options to work with in the forward core. As I just discussed, look how much options there are here. Why would you play 11 forwards here? You wouldn't. So I don't think Blashill's going to bring that back this year. In fact, he scrapped that pretty much halfway through last year. So I don't think you're going to see that again. So yeah, that means one of these two's got to be in Rockford. We'll see who that ends up being, right? Unfortunately, I think, at this point, probably Korchinski, because Del Mastro is a year older as well. He's, more experienced. So that's probably a guy you don't mind being on the bench compared to Korchinski, who probably needs to play at this point. So yeah, that's going to be something to watch there as well, right? That's going to be something to watch as well. So, plus you got to think about waivers of those guys too. You got to think about that as well. So, and then there's the goaltending. There's a goaltending too. Because right here we got Spencer Knight. I mean, obviously we know Spencer Knight's a starter. There's no question marks there, but I do think there's some question marks with the backup spot, right? There's question marks there. Because we got Comesso down in Rockford here. Now, do we want Drew Comesso to be spending a third year in Rockford? Do we want a fourth season? Yeah. Do we want a fourth season in Rockford for Drew Comesso at this point? I mean, he's had a few starts at the NHL level, in 24, 25, 25, 26. Comesso's gotten his first starts at the NHL level, and he's looked good. Comesso's looked good. Brief stints, sure, but he's looked good. He's been doing his job in Rockford on some not-so-great Ice Hogs teams. Does Drew Comesso need a fourth year in Rockford? 2020 draft pick, just a year behind Knight, 24 years old. What exactly has Arvid Seiblum done to deserve and to keep this backup spot here? What has he done the last 4 years? I don't think he's done enough. So, me personally, I'd love to see Comesso take this spot, but Seiblum's got 1 year left in his deal, so unless they move him, it's going to be Seiblum as a backup. Maybe Comesso has a great training camp, is able to bump Soda out, but for now, though, it looks like, yeah, the backup spot's probably Comesso, Soderboom, and then Comesso is still in Rockford again. And he's there as the third stringer. If there's an injury, then he's the first guy who's, if Knight, Soderboom go down, then, that could open up a spot for Comesso. As Soderboom's struggling, Comesso could be brought up as the season develops, right? So, but yeah, there's a lot to matter here, and that's just the roster spots, right? I'm just talking about, what 14 forward spots, 7 D-man spots, and what 2 goaltender spots are brought up there. But there's also, the lineup spots as well. Like, who's going to be, when Bedard comes back, who's going to be playing with him? Is it going to be Showtime? Is it going to be Canstrop? Is it going to be Frondesi, Nazar, Frank the Tank, Lardy? There's so many options here. The defense, right? Is Byram going to play on the left side, the right side? Who's going to play with him? Is it going to be Vlasic, right? How are these D pairs going to look as well? Now, there's going to be a lot of, there's going to be a lot to monitor this year. There's going to be a lot to monitor this year, right? There's a lot of fascinating battles with this lineup. We'll talk more about it, right? As we get into training camp, as we start the preseason, kind of start getting those first line combinations. We'll talk more about this, of course. But yeah, there's a lot to kind of contemplate here, which I think is very exciting. We haven't had this, type of conversation in a while. We haven't had this type of discussion in a while with the Blackhawks, right? So it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have. But anyway, that's all I got for this one. Just want to come on here. We're getting closer to the season, so just want to try ramping up the content as much as I can. Just very excited for this Blackhawks season. I think it's going to be a good one. Very much looking forward to it. So anyway, that's all I got for this one. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This is Justin Lynch. Bhawkmemes out. If you like the video, feel free to like it. Subscribe to the channel, more content. Feel free to hype the video on YouTube. Help it reach more traction. Feel free to comment your thoughts, reactions down below. Comment your thoughts. Love to hear them. And yeah, anyway, that's all I got for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. This is Justin Lynch. Bhawkmemes out. And I'll see you on the next one, baby. Bye-bye. Absolute cinema. Boop.